But what I've done is I've taken questions that I've gotten in the past, many of them, and basically compiled them into these questions that you might get, that you might come across. And so these are basically paraphrased real questions that I've gotten from skeptics, atheists, or people just asking questions in general. I'm going to knock them to Frank, and we're going to see how he responds and answers them. So Frank, the first question: believing in God is for dumb people. Evolution answers the question of how we got here. So how do we know that a God even exists?
That's so dumb. That's how we start. Let's start a question with an insult. That's always helpful, right? Religion is for dumb people. Well, look, it is.
You are unintellectual if you believe in God.
Okay, well, let's start by saying that reason itself needs to be explained. And if people are going to say, well, you're dumb for believing in something, what that person's presupposing is that it would be intelligent to believe something else. But why does reason exist to begin with? Why can we use a 3-pound organ between our skulls to try and ascertain truths outside of our skulls? Why can we do that at all? I mean, it's like when atheists say, well, there's no evidence for God. I sometimes want to say to them, why is there evidence for anything? I mean, why can we ascertain truths about the real world and draw conclusions about them? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, in my view, is because our mind is made in the image of the great mind. Mm-hmm. And there are these immaterial laws out there called the laws of logic that are grounded in God's nature that allow us to ascertain truths about the real world. Mm-hmm. So intelligence itself needs to be explained. When people say you're dumb if you don't believe X, Y, or Z, well, they're assuming that intelligence exists. But let me even back out further than that, Melissa, and say this. When people ask me, how do you know that God exists? My answer is because God explains effects that we can all see around us. In other words, we're reasoning from effect to cause. And this is what scientists do. When they have an effect, they're trying to figure out what caused it. So one example of an effect is creation itself. We know that the universe had a beginning. That's the effect. So we're trying to reason back to a cause. And if space, matter, and time is an effect, then the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. This is some of the things we unpack in our I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book and presentation. Mm-hmm. Design is an effect. So we're reasoning back to a cause, a designer. There's design in the universe and design in life. So we're reasoning from effect to cause. We have a moral law written on our hearts. That's an effect. So we're reasoning back to a cause, the moral lawgiver. We have the ability to reason, which is what we were just speaking about. That's an effect. So we're reasoning back to a cause, a transcendent mind. Mm-hmm. So how do we know God exists? We reason from effect to cause. We know him by his effects. Hey, isn't it interesting, though, that the evolutionists, speaking of evolution, because that was part of the question, they assume that the effect is greater than the cause, right? Mm-hmm. They're saying that we have all this complexity, say, just in human life, for example, that arose from something very simple. And somehow it brought us to this greater effect than the cause itself had to begin with. Well, that would seem to be a violation of cause and effect because the cause can't give what it doesn't have. So the effect shouldn't have something the cause doesn't have. And yet they're saying, no, we're an effect and it's greater than the cause that created us. Mm-hmm. These natural laws or whatever. So they're actually violating what is one of the principal elements of the law of causality, that the effect can't be greater than the cause.
And you do go into more detail in this, and you have Stealing from God and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Right. And I forget, Stealing from God is one of my favorite books, but so I'm remembering that one. But is that the book that you go into a little bit more detail, like a lot more detail?
Yeah, I go into more detail on effect and cause and all that in Stealing from God. And I think when atheists are bringing up these objections, like they're saying, well, it's dumb to believe in God. What are you stealing? You're stealing a standard of reason. You're stealing the ability to reason to say something's dumb. Yeah. Well, if atheism's true, we shouldn't even be able to reason. You know, in fact, C.S. Lewis put it really well. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, if our minds were the products of blind forces that didn't have its end in mind,
Mm-hmm.
then we shouldn't really trust anything we think.
Yeah.
And if we can't trust anything we think, then we can't trust arguments leading to atheism.
Mm-hmm.
He says, unless I believe in thought, I can't believe in or no, he put it this way: unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought.
Yeah.
So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God.
Yeah. Thanks for that. What about this one? I don't understand how morality proves that a God exists. Even an animal can show kindness to another, and it doesn't need to prove that a God exists. So how is this even a good argument?
Well, that's presupposing that kindness is a good thing. That's the very question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why should we be kind to one another? Because that would presuppose that we're valuable, and it would presuppose that treating somebody kindly rather than unkindly is a good thing. So the question is, why is that a good thing? And good presupposes a purpose in life, right? If you're going to say something's good, you're presupposing you're getting closer to that purpose than getting further away.
Mm-hmm.
And on atheism, there is no purpose to life. So there's no way to say this is the right way to live, because you're not really going anywhere. There's no direction to life. There's no grounds to say this is the wrong way to live, because again, you don't have a purpose to life. Well, you don't need to prove God exists to know right and wrong. That's certainly true. Mm-hmm. And you don't need God to exist, or you don't need to prove God exists or know God exists to be a so-called good person. But God must exist for good to exist. Otherwise, everything's just a matter of opinion. Right? It's just my opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion, or my opinion against Stalin's opinion. If there's no standard beyond us, we can't say one particular behavior is good and another particular behavior is bad. So you don't need God to know right and wrong. You don't need God to be good or bad. There just would be no good unless God existed. And it's to use a highfalutin philosophical term or terms, it's not an epistemological problem for the atheist. It's an ontological problem. We're not arguing about how you know right and wrong. We're arguing, why does right exist to begin with? That's the very question. And maybe an analogy will help. Mm-hmm. I can read a book and deny there's an author, right? I can totally understand what the book says and say, nobody wrote it. That's certainly true. But there would be no book to read unless there was an author. Same thing is true with morality. I can know morality and deny God exists, but there would be no morality to know unless God exists. Mm. Yeah. That's all we're saying. It's an ontological problem. It's, why does morality exist at all? Objectively, not just my opinion, not just your opinion. Why does it exist at all? Because there's a standard of goodness that we call God that we're obligated to obey. Now, this doesn't have to be the Christian God. It could be some other God that's the true God. I'm simply saying, without a standard outside of humanity, nothing's objectively right or wrong. That's really the point. Yeah. And you've been in quite a few debates too. And I've seen there are points where the atheist is debating you will concede your point. Like they understand that what you're saying is true, that like it's a matter of opinion, and that it's a matter of what society thinks is right or wrong at the time. Therefore, it's kind of like a fluid type of morality. So yeah, they'll say that, like David Silverman, who was the president of the American Atheists. Mm-hmm. He happened to be Jewish, but he was an atheist. And in our debate, after I pressed him, he admitted, according to his worldview, the Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And so I said to him, David, look, I mean, if your worldview is telling you that the Holocaust isn't really wrong, you have the wrong worldview. Right. Yeah. At least he was honest. Yeah. I was so stunned at his honesty, and, you know, like an honest atheist, like somebody who has to be consistent with their worldview. I respect it when they're honest, because then it makes it easier to kind of get down to the nitty gritty of what's going on, right. Like who's saying what. Okay, let's go to the third one. Why can't multiple universes explain the fine-tuning argument? Well, first of all, there's no evidence that multiple universes exist, because by definition, they're outside of our observation. We can't observe these. And secondly, as Paul Davies, who is an agnostic astronomer from Arizona State University, put it, he said, the multiverse is a dodge. It's a way of multiplying possibilities because this universe appears so designed. In other words, nobody would be talking about multiple universes unless the fine-tuning design argument was so strong. because what they're trying to avoid is saying, okay, there's got to be an intelligence out there that fine-tuned all this. So in order to avoid that, they're trying to say, well, maybe if there were trillions of universes, one of them, like ours, would just exist that would have these parameters by chance. Okay. The problem is, as I say, there's no evidence for it. Secondly, it appears to be a dodge. Thirdly, who's creating these universes? Why don't they collide with one another? And if they're being created, someone had to create them. In other words, you don't get rid of the need for a cause. It would seem like you'd multiply the need for a creator if there are multiple universes out there. You wouldn't get rid of the need for a creator. You'd have to have a creator to create all those too. In fact, for those universes to get started, they would have to be fine-tuned as well, because the fine-tuning argument isn't just an argument about how our universe exists now. The fine-tuning argument is also an argument for the creation event of the universe that had to be fine-tuned in such a precise way. For example, even Hawking admitted, he said, if the expansion rate within a second of the Big Bang was different by 1,000 million, just a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. So if the initial conditions of the universe were that different, we wouldn't even have a universe. Certainly not a universe that could support life. So the fine-tune, or I should say the multiple universe argument doesn't solve the problem. It actually multiplies the problem for the atheist. And let's see, I think I have his book up here on my shelf here. The book is by Alexander Vilenkin, who's an agnostic astronomer, who's a believer in the multiverse. I can't locate it right now, but he basically says this: even if there are other universes out there, the whole show would need an absolute beginning. So it doesn't appear like you get rid of the need for a beginner. Now, he doesn't think it's God, but he's saying there has to be an absolute beginning.
That's very interesting. Point number 3 is a very good point.
The multiple universe theory multiplies the problem for the atheist.
Okay, next one. All religions claim to be true. What makes you think your religion is the true religion and everyone else is wrong and damned to hell? Isn't that completely judgmental of you to say?
Is it judgmental of someone to say that I'm wrong if I believe that? Yes, everybody is judging, no matter what side of the aisle or what side of this question you're on. Everybody's making a judgment. Now, Christianity doesn't say that every other world religion is false on every point. We're not saying that. As Christians, we believe Islam has some truth in it. They believe in God. They believe in prayer. They believe that you ought to give 2.5%, just like Christians do.
Tithing. 2.5%. That's
it's 2.5 in Islam. Yeah, that's why maybe we ought to become Muslims, because we don't have to give as much. So no, I mean, Christianity is not saying that every other world religion is completely false on every point. What Christianity is saying is that where it differs from the truth, where it differs from the Bible or differs from the truth of Christianity, it's wrong in those areas. Islam's saying the same thing. Islam is saying that Islam is the true religion, and anywhere you differ from Islam, you're false. And if Islam is true, they're right about that. And if Christianity is true, they're right about that. If Buddhism's true, they're right. See, truth by definition excludes its opposite. So the only question is, what is true? And Christians are merely saying that if Christianity is true, then anything that disagrees with Christianity would be false. And every world religion says that. And those that don't are just illogical. I mean, if a world religion could say that all world religions are true, well, by definition, they can't be true because they teach opposites. For example, Christianity treats God as or Christianity believes God is triune. And of course, Islam doesn't. Christianity teaches that you're going to be your own person in the afterlife. Buddhism doesn't. They both can't be true, right? So the question isn't about being judgmental or being narrow. All truth claims are narrow. The question is it true? And the last part about well, does that mean that everyone's a non-Christian is going to hell? People go to hell not because they're non-Christians. People go to hell because they've sinned. it would be like saying it would be like saying you die because you don't go to the doctor. No, you don't die because you don't go to the doctor. You die because you have a disease. Now, maybe you could prevent dying by going to a doctor. And the same thing is true with Christianity. Maybe you could prevent eternal death by going to the great physician. But the reason that you're going to die is not because you haven't gone to the doctor. The reason you're going to die is because you have a disease. Mm-hmm. The reason you're going to be separated from God is not because you haven't believed in Jesus. It's because you've sinned. Now, you could prevent being separated from God if you believe in Jesus, because God's not going to force you into heaven against your will, right? If you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. And by the way, the issue of hell is a moral question, right? Someone is trying to say, well, it'd be immoral of God to send people to hell. Well, why would that be wrong? By what moral standard are you saying that that is wrong if there is no God? If there's no God, there's nothing right or wrong. Now, they might come back to you, Melissa, and say, well, you're saying your God is a God of love. Why doesn't he accept all people? He does accept all people, but he's not going to force people into his presence against their will. If they don't want Jesus in this life, they're not going to want him in the afterlife. So he's going to separate himself from them. That's called hell. It's separation from God. Now, obviously, we could spend more time talking about this, but the main point is that every truth claim excludes its opposite, and every other world religion is exclusive to some degree. And just because Christianity is saying that that Christianity is true doesn't mean every other world religion is completely wrong on everything. That's not the case.
Yeah, those are really good points. It's funny. I think it might have been you that said this too, that if God let everybody into heaven, that wouldn't be heaven, that would be here. Like
that's right. We're all here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, we're all here already. And like, there has to be something different about that aspect, about that entrance into heaven. And it has to do with the person of God, like who he is and how he works. Okay. This kind of springboards off of what you just said. How could a loving God send people to hell, especially for all eternity? So this is about hell, but this has to do with the type of punishment. Why not just allow everyone to heaven, which you've already talked about, but a temporary punishment? Why not have a temporary punishment for the people that have really done evil? And I think this goes into people who have different views on hell as well, too.
They do. Yeah. Some Christians try and make the case that ultimate or people that don't want to accept Christ will be punished for a short period of time or an appropriate period of time, and then they'll be annihilated. And some try and make the case for that. I personally don't think that case works, although it's not completely implausible. John Stott, who was a great theologian who died maybe 10 years ago, he believed that. But I think where Jesus, I think it's in Matthew 25, talks about that people who are unbelievers will be punished for eternity. And the same words there are used that you would use for eternal life. So if you're going to say that hell is only temporary, you'd have to say heaven is only temporary too, based on what Jesus says there. That's one of the problems with this temporal view. But a couple of questions that we should have. One is, well, yeah, doesn't it seem kind of overkill? I mean, if hell is eternal, why are you punishing them for eternity when they just committed temporal sin? That seems to be overkill, right? Well, I think there's two main responses to that. One is, the length of the punishment doesn't always equal the length of the crime. For example, it could take you 2 seconds to shoot somebody, but that doesn't mean you go to prison for 2 seconds, right? You're guilty, lock them up. Okay, let them out. No, I mean, that the punishment is going to last longer than the time it took you to commit the crime. And in some cases, depending upon who you commit the crime against, it might go on your entire life. For example, in some areas in America, we have life without parole. If you kill, say, a police officer, you might even get capital punishment for killing, say, a police officer, because the nature of the crime is so grave, even though the crime only took 2 seconds to commit. All right. The second aspect to this is, who said that you stop sinning when you get to hell? You might continue to sin while you're in hell, weeping and gnashing of teeth. That gives the impression that you're still conscious and you're still gnashing your teeth against God. So that's why it could be, anyway, that the punishment continues because you continue to sin in hell. Whatever the case is, and we can't completely unpack this from the scriptures because the scriptures don't give us exhaustive information on heaven or hell. All we can say is, since God is the standard of goodness, rightness, and justice, nobody in the afterlife is going to be treated unjustly or unfairly, because by definition, he is the standard of fairness and justice. So we rest in the justice of God to say that whatever happens in the afterlife will be fair. Now, there's only two kinds of people in the world, as C.S. Lewis said: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. In other words, he's going to separate people in the afterlife. People that want to be with him will be with him based on the sacrifice of Christ, and people that don't will be separated from him. And they will be treated fairly. Those who are separated from him will get justice. Those who accept what Christ has done will get grace. Those are the two things you get in the afterlife. You can get grace or justice. Justice is getting what you deserve. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. And that is forgiveness.
Yeah. And do you think that there's room for Christians to disagree about the temporal nature of hell? So like, you have people who are smart who might believe in annihilation. And then you have people who believe in a conscious eternal hell. And is it important to point out that Christians can have disagreements about this, yet still be brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yes, I think they can, although I can't see how hell could be complete annihilation with no punishment. Just you go out of existence, because then justice isn't done. I mean, think about how many people, Melissa, that have gone to their graves without ever serving any time or any punishment for their crime. I mean, there have been murderers, rapists, sex traffickers. Hitler himself basically never paid for his crimes on earth. He just committed suicide. He did not face trial. He did not spend any time in jail. Would that be appropriate for God? Would justice be done if Hitler just went out of existence without any punishment? Doesn't seem to me
it's a valid point.
Yeah. So there has to be some period of punishment, it would seem to me, in the afterlife for justice to be done. Christians argue whether it's eternal or not. It seems to me the weight of the scriptural evidence is it is eternal. And I don't have any problem with that, because I know God is just. Regardless of what happens, God is going to be just.
Yes, and his character, no matter what happens. Okay, now we're moving from those kinds of things about God and his nature into actual Christian doctrines and things that we upheld, like the Bible. How do we know the Bible is, and this is a long answer, I know you have to give a shorter answer, but how do you know that the Bible is reliable? Do we have any actual evidence for the Old Testament claims, like the army being wiped out in the Exodus? And how do we know that they recorded the truth and didn't make it up?
Okay. Well, the way I learned how to know that the Bible's true, and I'm really summarizing a lot here, is by pointing out, that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible, and the New Testament's telling the truth about the resurrection. Because if those four things are true, that there's truth, that God exists, that miracles are possible, and the New Testament is reliable enough to let us know that the resurrection occurred, then Christianity is true. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity is true.
Yeah.
And so what we do when we go to a college campus is we present those four questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? Is the New Testament reliable with regard to the resurrection? And we give evidence that the answer is yes to all those questions. And if the answer is yes to all those questions, then Christianity is true. Now you say, well, I trust Jesus. Because, well, look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. And if Jesus rose from the dead, he affirmed the Old Testament as the word of God, and he promised the New Testament. And so the reason I believe in much of the Old Testament, or let me put it another way, I believe in all the Old Testament, but the reason I believe in some of the Old Testament that I can't verify through archaeology or other historical means is because Jesus believed that the Old Testament was true. But I think you can also get evidence that the Old Testament is telling the truth. It's certainly telling us the truth about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Science and philosophy both show us that the universe had a beginning, and so there must be a beginner. I think there's evidence about the Exodus. In fact, we did an entire podcast on that a couple of years ago with Titus Kennedy.
You did.
He's an archaeologist, and he gives 10 lines of evidence from Egypt that the Exodus took place. Now, this doesn't prove everything in the book of Exodus, obviously. It's just showing you that it appears that there was an Exodus, okay? Can all the details be affirmed outside the Bible? No. But that's true of every historical account. You can't affirm everything, right? So I think there's evidence for the Exodus. There's many Old Testament archaeological discoveries. They found an inscription to David. They found, just recently, it appears they found potentially the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. They found so many cities in Jerusalem. The city of David is amazing when you go there. They may have found David's palace. They found cities like Hazor. They found Jericho. They found Megiddo's huge. Have you ever been to Megiddo? If you ever go to Israel, Megiddo's amazing. And there's so much that took place at Megiddo. There's just, I've been to Israel several times, and it's incredible. But the key reason I believe the Old Testament's true is because Jesus thought it was true. You can sum it all up into two if you wanted to, Melissa, just for if you only had a minute with somebody. Why do I believe Christianity is true? Because there's evidence that God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah. Those two questions. Because God has to exist in order for Christianity to be true, and also to rise Jesus from the dead, right? So if God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity is true.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people ask me like where they should start with certain things with this. And I always say the resurrection. I'm like, if the resurrection is, if you can really research that and really understand the historical implications for that. Because even skeptics they're to the point where it's like, okay, well, something happened, but we don't know what it was. They're not denying that it never happened. Something happened to the disciples specifically, but we don't know. But it can't be that he rose from the dead.
I was going to say, it's interesting you bring that up, because in recent years, the skeptical scholars, people like Bart Ehrman and others, who know Jesus existed. In fact, to his credit, Bart Ehrman has slapped down some of the atheists out there who said, "Oh, Jesus never existed." Bart Ehrman said,
"It's so bad." I have such secondhand embarrassment when people bring up that argument. I'm like, bro, no, just stop.
Ehrman in recent years has decided that he's not going to take an alternative theory to the resurrection. He's not going to say, well, maybe it was hallucinations, or maybe it was the swoon theory, or maybe it was they went to the wrong tomb, or whatever the current alternative theory is, because he knows, he's a smart man. He knows none of those things will work. He knows that there are fatal flaws in all these alternative theories, and so he's just decided, look, I'm just, as you just said, I'm just going to say we don't know what happened, but it wasn't a resurrection. Now that's telling. Why? Because why couldn't it be a resurrection if God exists? It could be, right? And it seems like the best evidence, or I should say the best interpretation of the evidence, is that Jesus did rise from the dead. So we're not arguing over the evidence. The evidence is what it is. The question is, how do you interpret the evidence? And if God exists, resurrections are easy. God can create the universe out of nothing. He can resurrect Jesus from the dead easily, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very fascinating topic. I love like researching and talking about the resurrection. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you can work back from there. Let's see. The next one we have is your book, Stealing from God, gave me the best answer for this, but I want to see how you answer it, because I have a feeling it'll be similar. With a terrible amount of evil in the world, it seems that a good God would do something to intervene. How can God sit and watch and do nothing about evil?
Yeah, great question. First of all, when someone brings up evil, you want to ask them, first of all, why do you ask that question? Because the answer is going to be different. If the person is just intellectually curious, then you can go into the philosophical answer. If the person just says, well, because my baby died 2 weeks ago, there's a different answer. You're not going to be talking about philosophy, right? That person doesn't need a philosopher. That person needs a pastor, somebody to sit beside them, somebody to comfort them, not somebody to give them intellectual answers. But why does God sit by and allow evil to occur? And I had that situation once at think it was at Michigan State University when I was going through the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist presentation. And I knew there was a militant atheist in the audience, Melissa, because he sat through the entire presentation looking like this.
Angry.
I mean, he didn't crack a smile once. And I had some pretty good jokes in there. Anyway, when it was time for Q&A, his hand went up immediately. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? I said, sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day. I mean, you ever notice that when we complain about evil, we always complain about somebody else doing it? It's like, hey, why don't you stop him? Or why don't you stop her? We never say, why don't you stop us? Mm-hmm. In fact, if God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would any of us still be alive at 12:01? I wouldn't be, right? Yeah, God could stop evil if he took away our free will. But if he takes away our free will, then we can't love. And this is not a moral universe anymore. And God thought it was desirable to create a universe where love could exist. So he gave us free will. He gave us the ability to love, but that also gives us the ability to do evil. Mm-hmm. So God's ultimate solution to evil is he quarantines it. That's what hell is. It's a quarantine of evil. He doesn't annihilate those people, although some people say, as we said earlier, that maybe annihilation ultimately is what happens to them. But it seems the more scriptural conclusion is that, no, he just quarantines them. He puts them in a place where they can't affect others. And so that's what God ultimately does to evil. Now, why does he sit by and allow certain evils to occur when we would go, hey, we would jump in and stop it? Well, we know, let's say, give an example that maybe can drive this home. Mm-hmm. Why does God allow babies to die, right? You might go, hey, that's if we could prevent babies from dying, we would, mm-hmm. right? Well, we know why God allows babies to die in general, because this is a fallen world and God can, of course, resurrect them in the afterlife. Mm-hmm. But we don't know why a particular baby dies. Why did my baby die? Why did your baby die? And the reason that we can't know that is because we're inside of time and God is outside of time. We know why babies die, but we don't always know why a particular baby dies, yet we know why we don't know why. We're inside of time, he's outside of time. Mm-hmm. And one insight that really helped me deal with the problem of evil, and if you haven't been bothered by the problem of evil, you probably haven't thought about it enough. But the insight that really helped me is something called the ripple effect, that every event that occurs affects trillions of other events rippling forward. Mm-hmm. So it could be that maybe a baby dying today ripples forward through a series of other events that contribute to bringing a great evangelist to earth 500 years from now who saves millions of people. We can't trace all those ripples, but God can, and he can bring good from evil. So even though evil things occur every day, the ripple effect can let us understand why we don't know why he allows certain evils, because maybe he's allowing these ripples to go forward to create other good things in the future. Mm-hmm. So he can respect free choice and allow us to do good and evil, but he can redeem evil through the ripple effect. He can bring good from bad, even when we can't see it. And of course, we see that, one example of that, we see it in Genesis 50, when Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph, is sold into slavery by his brothers, and somehow he makes it to Egypt, and he goes through a lot of pain and suffering there, but then he becomes the number 3 person in charge in Egypt, puts a whole bunch of grain aside, and then the very family that sold him into slavery leaves Israel to escape a famine. They get to Egypt and they see Joseph, and Joseph recognizes them, and what does he say to them? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives. Mm-hmm. In other words, the evil that the brothers did to Joseph actually rippled forward to help them later. Mm-hmm. They actually got good from doing evil later. Now, obviously, we don't want people to do evil to get good, but God, the point is that God can bring good from evil.
His sovereignty and providence. Yeah. For me, what that does is it springboards off of the whole argument for violence in the Old Testament as well. When it comes to like, well, that's evil. And then the whole moral argument you made before, because I can see people asking about that as well. And the answer you gave here and the answer for, the justice of God kind of can come into that. And you mentioned Paul Copan a lot on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
For why does God allow suffering or evil? Is it Paul Copan that does that, or is it the Old Testament?
Well, Paul Copan has a book called Is God a Moral Monster? I have it on my shelf here somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that little book is a great book on pointing out, here it is, it's right here. This book right here, for those watching on YouTube.
Okay.
This book can really answer a lot of questions about the Old Testament God.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that much of what we read about in the Old Testament, it's not evil for God to judge sin.
Mm-hmm.
That's good for God to judge sin because he's the judge, right? He is the standard of justice and he can judge sin, and he does judge sin. We look at it and go, oh, why would God kill all those people? Maybe he killed those people because they deserved it. We never think of that, right? Oh, they're just innocent people like us. No, they're sacrificing their babies to the molten hot metal idol Molech. They're putting their babies on the arms of this metal god, watching the babies sizzle to death.
Mm-hmm.
And, on every college campus I go to, Melissa, I hear people saying, well, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? Well, here's an instance in the Old Testament where God says, that's it, there's too much evil, we got to wipe these people out. And the atheists are complaining about it, right? Yeah. They're going, oh no, why would God stop all this evil? You just got done saying God should stop evil. Then in the Old Testament, when he does, they go up, he shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Look, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah. And I think this kind of springboards into the next question too, about what is actually a sin in God's eyes and what is evil. This has to do with homosexuality. The Bible, this question says, the Bible doesn't teach homosexuality is a sin. So why do Christians condemn it?
Well, if the person was here, I'd ask, why do you say it doesn't condemn homosexual behavior, not homosexuality?
Yeah.
Because people think homosexuality is an identity. We're not talking about an identity. We're not talking about I have feelings. We're not talking about attractions. We're talking about actions.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So does it talk about sexual behavior, homosexual behavior as sinful? Yes. Just like it talks about fornication and adultery and rape and other sexual behaviors outside of the marriage of a man and a woman. They're all sinful because God has a design for life, and the design for life is that men and women come together inside of marriage to procreate and bring up the next generation. That's the reason that God has said that sex between a man and a woman is the ideal, and anything that deviates from that is sinful. It's not arbitrary. It's because that's the truth of what God wants. He wants to be fruitful and multiply and bring up children by the biological two-parent family. That's because there's a purpose to life, right? And if there's a purpose to life, then there's a right way to live it. If there's no purpose, you can't say there's a right way to live it or a wrong way to live it. Now, one of the problems that I think people have who say, well, say homosexual behavior is a right, or same-sex marriage is a right, or transgenderism is a right, or whatever they want to say is a right, rights can only exist if God exists. Otherwise, they're just preferences. They're just opinions. So they have to steal a standard from God while claiming God doesn't exist, because many of them are atheists. And if they're not atheists, then they have to give some sort of rational justification as to why God would think, say, homosexual behavior is a right, or transgenderism is a right, or abortion is a right. And I think you're going to have a real hard time doing that.
Yeah.
Not just according to Christianity, but Islam wouldn't agree with that, right? Or natural law wouldn't agree with that. The reason that Jesus and the apostles have the views they have regarding sexuality is because there's a design to life. There's a purpose to it that we're supposed to follow. And when we don't, we get into trouble.
Yeah.
As you say, we could talk a long time about it, but a lot of people will say, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality. And first of all, that's not true. But even if it was true, that wouldn't mean he was for it. Like, Jesus never said anything explicitly about rape, but that doesn't mean he's for rape. Okay. But Jesus did talk about it. Why? Because in Mark chapter 7 and elsewhere, he says it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. And then he talks about a series of sins: theft, sexual immorality, and some other things. And while he didn't use the word homosexual, what he used, or homosexuality or fornication or any other adultery, he didn't use that word in this context. the category sexual immorality included any kind of sexual behavior outside of the behavior of a man and a woman inside of marriage, right? So he's talking about the category. It would be like saying, well, Jesus never said anything about felony home invasion. And you go, well, he must have been for it then. No, he didn't talk about felony home invasion directly, but he talked about the category known as theft. He said it's what comes out of a man, theft, sexual immorality, that makes him unclean. So felony home invasion would be a subset of the category known as theft, just like homosexual behavior would be a subset of the category known as sexual immorality.
That's an interesting point. I've never quite heard it put that way before. And that makes a lot of sense, like the categorical sins that he went through, because I don't think people consider that. You're right. It's like, oh, well, you know, he never said anything about beating your wife, or, you know, like he never said anything about all these other things that were obviously demonstrably against what he would have been for. This last question is about abortion. Why is it that only religious people say abortion is wrong? It seems to me that they only care about the baby when it's in the womb and could care less after the baby is born.
Well, actually, that's not true, because there's atheists for life.
Absolutely.
You know, in fact, one of my debates with Christopher Hitchens, he was pretty close to being pro-life. I was asking him about it. So he seemed to agree that you shouldn't take the life of a child in the womb. So it's not just a religious issue. You don't need religion to know that you ought not murder innocent human beings. You need God for that to be objectively wrong, but you don't need to believe in God to know it's objectively wrong. Now, why are religious people so concerned about life? Well, shouldn't we tip our hats to religious people that they ought to be concerned about life? You know, I had a question once at the it was Central Oklahoma University. A young lady got up to the microphone and said she can't believe in the Old Testament because God killed people in the Old Testament, and that's wrong. Okay, and I had a big, long discussion with her, and finally, toward the end of it, I asked her, and you can see this on our YouTube channel, by the way, Cross-Examine YouTube channel. I asked her, can I ask you a question? Where are you on the abortion issue? She said, oh, I'm pro-choice. And I said to her, let me ask you a question. You just got done claiming that God was immoral for killing people in the Old Testament, and you shouldn't do that. And yet here you are claiming that you have a right to kill people now through abortion. When you're saying when God plays God, he's immoral, but when you play God, that's a moral right for you. I say, can you justify that for me? Well, she couldn't. Why? Because on one hand, she's claiming God doesn't have the right to judge people or kill people, but she does. How does that make any sense at all? It doesn't make any sense. So the reason that Christians are so concerned with life is because the right to life is the right to all other rights. If you don't have life, you don't have anything. And if you're just going to murder people before they even take their first breath, that would seem to be a crime. And Christians should be concerned about it. And when it comes to politics, people will say, well, don't impose your morality on me. And I'll say, well, why are you imposing your morality on me? Right? Yeah. You're doing that right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, but you're imposing that ought not on me right now. And by the way, when people say don't impose your morality on me, I say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize the man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. It just happens to be the morality, right? The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not the law written on their hearts. He says this in Romans chapter 2. So it's not my morality. It's not your morality. It's just the morality. And if you don't like that morality, fine. You don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. So we're concerned about this because it's such a momentous issue. What could be more important than life?
It was actually, who was it? Tim Barnett with Red Pen Logic, Mr. B.
Yeah.
He made a really good point about that this isn't like a Christian thing, like a religious thing. It's a moral thing.
Right.
So yeah, it's like it would be, and the example that made sense to me is that if somebody said, it's my right to murder, you know, like it's my right to steal. it's like, no, we're not focusing on this as politics. We're focusing on it because we see it as that, as it would be similar to saying that you have the right to murder, and we're coming against that. Like, it's a morality thing. It's not like a Christian religious thing, even though it's kind of been politicized to be that way. I would not agree with that. I just think there's lots of people. I come from the New Age. A lot of New Agers are pro-life. A lot of them are pro-life. They just stay underground about it because they'll get hate for it if they speak out really against it. And even a lot of atheists are. So there's atheists for life. Yeah. Yes.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a good point. We're not legislating religion when we say don't murder.
Yeah.
We are legislating morality.
Yeah.
And all laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality. And I'm saying not my morality, not your morality, the morality. So yeah, you don't have to believe in God to know you ought not murder people. God has to exist for that to be objectively wrong, but you don't need to believe in God to know it's objectively wrong. That's what I'm saying. So yeah, we're not, when we have laws against theft and rape and murder, we're not saying, okay, we're imposing religion on people. No, we're imposing morality, which is related to religion, but you don't have to be religious in order to know it's wrong, nor do you have to be religious to be a member of society and be against murdering people in the womb.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And thank you. Thank you for answering that question. Thank you for answering the rest of the questions. I appreciate you coming on to do this with me. I've actually been wanting to get you on for a long time, to just make a fun video, do a Q&A, kind of, what you do. And if y'all don't know about Cross-Examined or Frank Turek or what he does, I've talked about him on my channel for, a long time now, Cross-Examined, Frank's books. And I would highly recommend and suggest that you go and check out their channel. I will leave a link in the description. Frank does this all the time. He goes to universities, churches, and he does his presentation. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And he lets people come up and do Q&As, so that he is no stranger to any of these questions. He has been asked these questions up and down, left and right over the span of, gosh, how many years, Frank, have you been doing this?
Well, we started going to colleges like in 2007. So
oh, wow.
A while.
Yeah. So for a while. And I just highly recommend, it's a great resource for you. And Frank, before we sign off, is there anything you want to add or say to my audience?
Yeah, I want your audience to come to our channel because some of your videos are on our channel too.
I'm on the apologetics team on Cross-Examined, and it's a ton of fun. It's great. I think that the content over there just it's amazing. It's actually, it's fun because me, Elisa Childers, and John McCrae. Yeah, we all three are on the apologetics team at Cross-Examined, and we do videos that kind of in our wheelhouse. And those are great resources for you guys as well. So Frank, I want to thank you so much for taking this time to come and talk with me today.
Well, Melissa, thanks for having me on. And I love your videos, love the work you're doing.
Ditto.
And I love also the work you're doing for our Cross-Examined apologetics team too. So it's great.
I love doing the work. It does not feel like work.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody too. Keep watching Melissa.
Yeah. Keep watching Frank.